Now that we have our SAS token, we'll take a look at the simplest and easiest way to integrate it with Azure CDN using pass-through SAS Authentication. In fact, we actually got very close to getting this to work in our last demo when we verified the SAS token in the browser. After we're done, we'll cover the benefits and drawbacks of this authentication approach. Before we jump straight into the demo, I do want to quickly go over what this will look like conceptually. First, we have our Azure CDN Edge server and our Azure Storage blob origin. Then we have our user requesting a resource. Once we've locked down Azure Storage to use a SAS token, the Edge server will not be able to request resources anymore unless it already has the resource in its local cache. So what needs to happen is the Edge server must pass the SAS token to Azure Storage in each request it makes to refresh its cache. In pass-through authentication, we'll put the onus on the user to send the token so that the Edge server may pass it through to Azure Storage. This is what we'll configure next. Starting off from our last demo, here's the SAS token we generated. We were just testing this token with our default CDN configuration in the browser, as you can see here, by passing it in the URL to our container resource. And this worked. However, I also showed you when I make a similar request in this incognito window that I can still request the index.html resource if I pass a fake query string parameter. Obviously, when we're trying to authenticate only the CDN to use a SAS token, we don't want the user to be able to bypass the token to request resources if someone already used the token once to request a resource. We need to require it on every request from the CDN Edge server. Let's hop over to the Azure portal to see exactly why this is happening. If we look at our CDN endpoint resource, then look at this caching rules section, notice right here what our query string caching behavior is set to. It's set to ignore query strings. Essentially what this means is that once Azure CDN receives a request for a resource containing one query string, it caches that response and serves it for any request for that resource regardless of what query string the user specified. In many circumstances, this is optimized. We don't necessarily want to cause the CDN to go back to the origin to retrieve essentially the same resource data just because the user changed a query string. But with pass-through SAS token authentication, this caching behavior is not what we want. Instead, we need to change the setting to cache every unique URL. Now after we save this change, we can go back to the incognito window, then try our fake request again, and it'll fail, as the CDN has now attempted to request the resource from the blob container, this time without the required SAS token. So that's good. We have now successfully configured pass-through SAS authentication. Let's go over some benefits and drawbacks with the pass-through SAS authentication approach. First, the benefits are that it's simple and easy to configure. It only required us to change a single CDN setting to cache unique URLs. It's also easy to pass the token once we have it in each URL request. Perfect for a trusted subsystem approach where you don't mind if the other system has your SAS token. But that's also the first major drawback of this approach. It does require the client to have a password equivalent secret, and furthermore, they must pass it on every request in plain view. Well, HTTPS encrypts it, but the client still has to pass it on their end in plain view. This is ill-suited to serving a CDN for public anonymous users. The other drawback to call out is that by turning off the ignore query string caching behavior, we now open ourselves up to the possibility of incurring more storage requests, and therefore a higher bill, because any other query string parameters appended to URLs will now be cached uniquely. Think of a newsletter that embeds analytics query string parameters. Not only would passing the SAS token in those newsletter URLs be an objectively bad security practice, but it would also negate the benefit of a CDN by causing Edge servers to call the blob storage for every single unique URL. With that said, certainly there could be scenarios where this might be acceptable. For example, in situations where you want to distribute more than one SAS token to users for restricting or controlling CDN access. In our static website content example, however, it would be great if we could hide the complexity of the SAS token from users and only have the CDN care about it, which is what we'll cover next.